next we would like to move on, and for that I would like to invite that is next topic is fish authenticity, and Dr. N. Bhaskar will come up over here to explain this in detail. And he's a regulator, scientist, researcher, advisor, QA, Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, New Delhi, from December 2016 to till now, and principal scientist at CSIR-CFTRI, Mysore, from January 2010 till now, and scientist E1 CSIR CFTRI Mysore from January 2006 till December 2009. Scientist C CSIR CFTRI Mysore, January 2002 to December 31, 2005. Scientist B CSIR CFTRI Mysore from 1997 to December 2001. And hereby we want to mention his fellowships at National Academy of Agriculture Sciences 2017, Corporate Fellow Society of Fisheries Technologists India SOFTI 2015, Association of Food Scientists and Technologies India AFSTI 2015, and Society of Applied Biotechnology SAB 2011. And hereby further I would like to mention few of the awards received by Dr. N. Bhaskar, and these are as follows. UAS Gold Medal Award 1993. Professor HPC Shetty Gold Medal Award 1993 by UAS Bangalore. Best Student Award 1993 by AFSTI Mysore. Best Group 4 Scientist Award 2006-2007 by CSIR CFTRI Mysore. Professor MS Swaminathan Best Fisheries Scientist Award 2006-2007 by PFGF Mumbai. Lalji Goto Samrak Nidhi Award for Excellence in R&D 2010 by AFSTI Mysore. Japanese Government Scholarship 2002-2004 by Government of Japan. JSPS Invitation Fellowship 2008-2009 and 2015 to 2016 by JSPS Government of Japan. So hereby he has received so many awards, and we really congratulate sir for receiving and having so many elegant dignitary awards in your list, in your hat. So now would invite sir on screen Dr. N. Bhaskar to speak upon topic of fish authenticity. Can we please have the AB?
Good morning to all. First of all, I wish to thank AOAC India section for inviting me to be part of this virtual event on food authenticity and safety, especially from the context of seafood farm. Seafood, from among all the protein sources, is a widely traded commodity globally. Although the production is limited by boundaries, the consumption is truly global and is beyond boundaries. The globally traded value of seafood is in excess of US dollar 165 billion in the year 2018 as per the official figures of FAO. The seafood trade is quite complicated and uniquely diverse as compared to any other animal protein sources, because of the fact that the trade comprises nearly more than 1,800 edible species available across the globe, which are commercially viable and traded, including the fish and shellfish captured or cultured. The complexity of this seafood trade actually entails the consumers to be deceived of many things, which I would deliberate and I would elaborate during the course of my presentation. So that's the reason I have titled my presentation as Seafood Fraud, Que Hacemos, the Indian Scenario. And although I have specifically spoken of the Indian scenario, the entire presentation is quite applicable globally. And for the uninitiated, I would like to mention that the Que Hacemos means what should we do in Spanish. Now, before we begin, I just would like to highlight one of the comprehensive definition available for seafood that is available in the EU regulation, and it defines seafood as all seawater and freshwater animals, whether wild or farmed, and including all edible forms, parts, and products of such animals. This is one of the most comprehensive in my professional opinion. Having said that, let's look at what does the production chain or the value chain of aquatic foods or seafood involve. It involves an aquatic environment, the fish or the shellfish can be captured or cultured, and in either case it needs to be transported, and the captured fishes also provides a feed resource for the culture operations, and it can be simply primarily processed, for example, just eviscerated or descaled and then stored and then sold for, or it can be sold as is just by washing and then icing the fish and then it is sold. And then it can also undergo secondary uh, processing where there is a buyer involved or a processor involved, and it can be distributed through different channels. Either it can be food service, restaurants, retailers, or markets, and finally it reaches the consumer. However, if you look at the entire operations, the only common factor you can see is the water. Having said this, now you look at the entire global seafood trade. Anything that is produced in India can be on a plate in Europe, in the US, in Mexico, in China, in Japan, or in Korea. Anything that is produced in Japan can be in India, in Sri Lanka, it can be in Bangladesh. So, which means it can happen, the production can happen locally, but the consumption can happen globally. Similarly, there are variety of commodities that are available for trade, and that here it includes more than 1,800 edible and commercially viable species. And these can be of extremely different species, size, shape, taste, etc. Now, again, I say, from among all this, the most common factor, either from the production site or the harvesting site to the processing site or at the consumer table, the only common factor you can see is the water. Now, if you look at the net importers and net exporters across the globe, and I've just tried to highlight the major importers and major exporters of seafood here. And if you see, more or less, they're the same thing. And if you take India, we stand about at around about 8 to 10 position on the world top 10 of exporters, and we are net exporters of seafood. So the export performance of Indian seafood between 2012-16, I just thought I should highlight to the audience. We have been growing in terms of seafood exports, and currently we stand at around 7 billion US dollars, which is quite a lot considering that we are number 2 in aquaculture production, and we always hover around the 5th or 6th position in capture fish production. Now, having seen the complexity of the seafood trade, the important thing that comes to mind: how do you know from where it is coming? So, what is important in the entire trade fraternity is to know from where it is coming. So that means we need to establish the traceability of any of the commodity that is being traded. So even in this case, I found the most comprehensive definition that is available is in the EU regulations, and this defines the traceability as the ability to trace and follow a food, feed, or food product, animal, food producing animal or substance intended to be or expected to be incorporated into food or feed through all stages of production, processing, and distribution. Now, having said this, let's put things into the perspective. Now, we know the seafood trade is complex. The seafood trade needs a traceability network. The seafood trade involves more than 1,800 species. Now, there is always a chance in any of these pieces, there is a chance of frauding a consumer. So, what do you mean by seafood fraud? When you look at seafood fraud, generally people tend to think that mislabeling, misrepresentation, or substituting a species amounts to seafood fraud. But it also includes some practices in the processing or at the retail end, over icing or excessive glazing in case of frozen vegetables, or masking the origin, trying to tell that the species is from one country but sell a species from the other country, and then also use of unapproved additives. All these are considered as seafood fraud. Essentially, these are done to gain it's a very deliberate economic advantage or profiteering. So hence this is also can be branded as economically motivated adulteration. Now when you look at economically motivated adulteration, how much does it matter? As per one of the studies done in the US, from based on the data collected from the 1980s, since 1980s, nearly 35% of the seafood sold at the retail ends, be it is in the restaurants or in the retail chains, are found to be mislabeled. So, which is going to mean a lot in terms of consumer frauding. Similarly, even in the EU, it's a big problem. Nearly 40% of the mislabeling issues happen in restaurants or retail outlets. Now, in terms of exporting countries like India, it also becomes a big problem, especially from the image point of view of the country, as well as for the economic disincentive when it is the consignment is rejected based on mislabeling or misrepresentation. So it has a problem for the export market too, and also has an implication in the importing countries. Now, if you look at the parameter-wise rejections of Indian seafood between 2012 and 2016, you see that nearly about 15% of the rejections are based on seafood fraud issues. Especially when I say seafood fraud, I mean only the mislabeling or inappropriate additives used in a particular product. Now, why does it become so important? What is the cause and what are the effects? Now, if you look at it, there are three different issues that actually border and are the main effects and the causes of seafood fraud. What the effect is actually on the public health and safety. The other effect is on the cost, and the third impact, although it's third least but not the least, it's also an effect on the environment. And why do I say that? See, for example, when you look at the public perspective, it can create health issues, it can create safety issues. For instance, a species called as escolar contains a toxin called as gempilotoxin, which is also called as X-lax. This escolar fish can be passed as one of the most expensive fish, like tuna. Similarly, there is a fish called as tilefish, which can accumulate mercury. It can be passed as red snapper, which is one of the premium species, which sells at quite a huge sums per kilo. Now, can anybody identify which fish is this? If you look at the left one, it is the X-lax or the escolar, which contains gempilotoxin. On the right is the albacore tuna. Now, if you look at the preparation, when it is served, especially when it is battered or baked or battered and breaded or fried, nobody can distinguish. Even the connoisseur cannot distinguish between these two. So you would be defrauding a consumer with a very cheap fish, but also affecting his health with in the name of a premium fish. Similarly, if you look at these two photographs, you see two fishes and two fillets. Now, if you look at the left one, it's a red snapper one, which is highly expensive one. Whereas on the right side is tile fish, which actually accumulates mercury. Now, it can cause health effect, but it is available for a cheaper price. It can be sold off or it can be passed off as red snapper. Similarly, like in the previous slides, a less expensive fish can be provided as a highly expensive fish in the name of by just misrepresenting the species, and it can lead to unwanted or undesirable profiteering, especially from the point of view of consumers. So, for example, what you see on the top half and the bottom half, can anybody tell us what kind of fish these are? Actually, for somebody who actually is going to be served with a fried or a breaded or a battered fish of this, they would actually, the bottom one can pass off as the top one, the top one can pass off as the bottom one. Now, if you look at the top on this one on the right side, this is the bottom one is cobia, which is 1/10 of the cost of sea fish. The right one is basa, which is again about 1/8 the cost of sea fish. So essentially, you can pass off this as sea fish by investing less, and you can actually make a large amount of profit, and you would be in the process defrauding the consumer of he would enjoy thinking that it is spearfish, but you would be serving him either basa or cobia, which means you are actually committing a fraud in the name just by misrepresenting two species. Similarly, you look at red snapper, the fillet, and you look at the fillets from rockfish or the tilapia. You can simply pass the two, which are the one on the left side with the right the two on the right side. The one on the right side actually are very less expensive and they can be passed off as a highly expensive red snapper. Now, for the benefit of the audience, I have just summarized what would be the cost offset actually if it happens. So obviously, the cost offset per kilogram would be to the tune of anywhere from minimum of $4 to $10, which is a huge when you look at the amount of fish that is traded across the globe. Similarly, from the environmental point of view, it can result in illegal or unreported, unregulated fishing. And as per one estimate, the IUU fishing is to the tune of about 12 to 24 US dollar billion. It's about 12 to 24 billions of US dollars. And that's a huge sum. And it can also encourage banned species. For example, this can anybody guess what fishes these are? The one on the left and one on the right. The one on the right is basa, and the one on the left is a traditional indigenous catfish of India. Now, initially, the Vietnamese basa was passed off as the fillet of suchi, and the fish was introduced into India illegally. Now, it has become a menace in the aquatic and the fisheries ecosystem of the country. Similarly, if you look at the catfish on the right side, these are African catfishes, and the one on the left side is a riverine catfish, which is indigenous to India. This is Clarias batrachus, and these are Clarias garipineus and Icterus punctatus. Now, in the name of Clarias batrachus, and due to introduction of these exotic species, the fisheries ecosystem in many of the rivers have been wiped out, and you hardly find riverine catfishes, the Clarias batrachus, to the tune to a very less tune compared to the one that is to be found previously. So this particular aspect is so important from the point of view of environmental impact. Now, if you look at seafood fraud, it actually has a motive, has an effect, and it can finally result on the consumer in terms of frauding him. Now, what are the direct drivers? Because the commodities are diverse and there are numerous species and there is a high global demand and there's huge gaps in pricing, it encourages people to undertake seafood fraud. So the effect is it can be on health, it can be on the price, especially on the pockets of the consumer and also on the environment. Similarly, the indirect drivers for this seafood fraud are there are no incentives for the industry to be very honest, and there are no mechanisms to trace, or there is no transparency available in the system to know what a particular FBO, the food business operator, is selling. And also there is a very low prosecution as of now, and then there's also the detection mechanisms that are available is very poor. Now, there is also enforcement being a state subject, and the policy making is from the central sphere. It becomes important that there is good coordination, however, which actually lacks when it comes to enforcement, especially in terms of seafood fraud. Now, how this seafood fraud can be addressed? What are the feasible solutions? And I would say just play dart. When I say dart, it's not the board game that I suggest to play. I mean by dart, I mean determine the species, determine the value, determine the method of fishing, and determine the origin of the species, and authenticate the species, the correctness, and the method of fishing, and also the origin. Then record it, especially from the point of view of the bag, the supplier, the place, the geographical area from which it is harvested. and trace the entire value chain, and again feed the trace records into the recording, so that you have a complete information chain which is based on traceability, that you know how much was caught, how much was transported, how much was sold, and what is the total value that has realized from the entire operation. Now, when you want to determine or authenticate stocks or populations, as you all are aware, seafood is so diverse, and the same species can be available in two different waters, and they can differ, and it can be established through many tools. One of the tools is the geochemical tools, especially the trace elemental fingerprinting. For instance, the mineral pattern on the scale or the otolith can be determined by trace elemental fingerprinting, and it is very unique to a particular water. So different stocks of fishes can be determined by this, or different populations of fishes can be determined by this. Similarly, you can also use fatty acid profiles as one of the tools, and also the protein profiling as one of the tools. And the more accurate one is the DNA based method. However, DNA based method cannot distinguish the populations or the stock. So when I say we have tools, they can be used comprehensively, in combination, is singly, depending on the situation. Besides this, we can also use something called as DNA barcoding, and which I would explain further in my next slides. Now, before that, I would like to compare the methods available and the advantages and disadvantages. I would not completely go through, but except that I would like to mention that the DNA-based methods, the more sensitive, accurate, and specificity of the species can be very much achieved. However, it is very expensive. A lot of skill is required. On-field applicability, although now there are techniques that are coming that can be used on the field also, but it's quite limited in terms of on-field application. So when I say DNA barcoding or DNA, I mean determine the necessary authenticity using the nucleotide DNA. So when we look for DNA to determine the necessary authenticity, we can use different tools even in the DNA based methods. One of the DNA based method is just to look at genomic DNA, and then use any of these methods. It can be restricted fragment length polymorphism, or random amplification, or forensically informative nucleotide sequencing, or amplified fragment length polymorphism. Now, I just would like to highlight some of the works that are actually commercially viable and that have been done, reported across the world. So these are different works that I have compared. And almost all these methods are very specific, but these are all based on genomic DNA. Now, the more specific method than this is also available. And now, before that, I would like to summarize different genomic DNA based methods here. And you can see I have just given, based on the publication of Rams and Madison, I have given the comparison of all these different methods. And these can be used for different families and different groups of fishes. Now, if you look at authentication of the species as well as the differentiation within the species. For example, there can be two different species of tuna. They can be differentiated, and for which DNA barcoding is the most preferred method. Now, what is DNA barcoding? It is, first of all, we need to understand what is a barcode. It has about 11 variable numbers and positions with 10 possible numbers, and we can assign nearly about 100 billion items with these numbers. Now, what is a DNA barcode? Now, you determine a sequence, and you determine the ideal sequence particularly specific to a particular species or subspecies, and then use it as a barcode. Now, internationally, there is something called as International Barcode of Life. This is the website for somebody who would like to visit, and the target was 500,000 species, and they have met the target to create a sequence of 500,000 species, and they have met the target on August 10, 2015. And this particular Barcode of Life has developed Barcode of Life database, and for fish, it is called the Fish Barcode of Life or the Fish Bowl. And this is that website for somebody who wants to visit this. Now, for this, what they have done is they have defined the DNA barcode region, especially based on the cytochrome C oxidase subunit 1. They have preferred cytochrome C oxidase 1 because it cannot be easily recombined and it lacks any genomic introns, and the primers that are available for this particular sequence is very robust, and there are hundreds and thousands of mitochondrial cells where the copies of COI gene can be available in the sample. Hence, COI is the preferred one for this DNA barcoding, and essentially it follows the same process as I explained before, except that it works on the COI, the cytochrome oxidase subunit 1 gene, and then the sequence is done and the specific sequence is barcoded. So, for example, I have just given the barcodes for different species, the tuna, the escolar, the cod, the iridescent shark, haddock, or the red grouper. The target is about 30,000 fish species for this fish bowl. However, so far they have sequenced about 8,000 species. But just authenticating the identity, would it solve the problem of seafood fraud? I would say no, because the methods are so expensive and not user friendly in terms of on-field application. Hence, we need to look at different means. Are there any solutions? That's what we need to. So, though, I would like to now highlight the overall solutions that we can think of in terms of addressing seafood fraud. Now, I would not get into the details of this as I've already explained. Now, with all this direct drivers and indirect drivers and the effect, I would like to say that seafood fraud can be addressed by resetting. Now, when I say reset, I mean the regulations and regulatory bodies, the empowering of consumers and markets, synchronizing with international standards, educating the stakeholders, and technical certification programs for all the stakeholders, especially the industry operatives. Now, when I say regulations or regulatory bodies, the best example I could think of was the US FDA list of tradable fish species with common names and accepted market names, and that is available on the US FDA website. I have just showing you on the screen for the benefit of the audience. And if you look at, this is one of the most updated database, and this database as on date was last updated in July 2020 and currently contains about 1960 plus species. Similarly, you can also look at something called as fish base, which is hosted by FAO, where you can verify the common name or the market name or the history or the biology or the stock information or the important production information of a particular species in this database. And this can be made use especially through by harmonizing for harmonizing a lot of international standards. The other thing is technical certification programs, and the best I can think of is the Marine Stewardship Council, where actually they talk about traceability of from pond to the plate or from ocean to the plate. So this is something that actually can go a long way in terms of addressing seafood fraud. Now, is that enough? Now, I would say, having done that, you need to eat to enjoy the best meal only when it comes with 3 C's. When I say eat to enjoy the best meal, I mean enforcing to enable through graded penalties, so that the FBO is first given a graded penalty so that they all fall in line or they do not venture into any of these unwanted practices. Also, all these graded penalties or the enforcement or enabling them has to come from based on evidence which is scientific or technical, and which is based on risk analysis or evidential analysis. And based on this, actually a minimum or effective auditable legislation can be formed, wherein we need not have to restrict the competition, but we can implement a lot of non-regulatory measures like good manufacturing practices, best aquaculture practices, etc. And also try to have a regulatory list of tradable names, common names so that they do not misrepresent a species, which actually eventually would lead to a consistent, a compliant, and a complete ecosystem wherein you can address the entire issue of seafood fraud, so that when you eat your fish, you will enjoy it to the teeth with the best appetite and the best taste, and you're assured that what you're eating is what you have asked for. So, summarizing the entire issue, having seen the direct drivers, indirect drivers, and the effect, and using the different solutions available and resetting it, you can actually educate and empower the consumer so that he is very much aware what he is eating and what is coming on his plate, and he is very assured that he is not defrauded of things that he is not aware. And with that, I end my presentation, and some of the sources that I've used for my presentation are listed here. And I would like to thank my Chief Executive Officer for permitting me to be present amongst you for this virtual conference. And I would like to thank my friend Dr. Sangeeta for some of the images and information that I used in the presentation. I also thank the organizers of this food summit, which basically enhances and talks about food authenticity and food safety. And to all of you for having been patient with me in listening to my presentation. Thank you. And I would be happy to receive any of the questions or any of the discussions through the organizers on the chat box. And I am willing to learn from any of the information that you all would provide me. And I am willing to clarify any of the information that you seek from me. And if I'm not able to reply you immediately, I will definitely get back to you within a very limited time. And I will be clarifying your doubt. Thank you, and you can find me here on the Google Scholar. Thank you very much for being patient with me.